The marriage proposal arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2018. I was 26, working as a software engineer in Mumbai, and living independently for the first time in my life. My parents had been pressuring me to consider arranged marriage for months, and I'd finally agreed to let them post my profile on a matrimonial website, hoping it would buy me some time and peace. The proposal came from a family in Delhi. The man's name was Rohit Sharma, 32 years old, working in finance, from what appeared to be a respectable family. The initial communication went through our parents, as was traditional. Photos were exchanged, family backgrounds were discussed, and everything seemed normal. My parents were impressed by his family's status and his educational credentials. After 2 weeks of family negotiations, Rohit asked for my phone number to speak directly. This was the expected next step, so I agreed. Our first conversation was pleasant enough. He was articulate, seemed well-educated, and asked appropriate questions about my career and interests. We talked for about 30 minutes, and he suggested we continue getting to know each other through regular calls. The second call came the very next day, then another the day after that. By the end of the first week, Rohit was calling me twice daily, once in the morning before work and once in the evening. When I mentioned that this felt excessive, he laughed it off, saying he was just excited to get to know his potential wife. He made it sound romantic, like he was so interested in me that he couldn't wait to talk. Within 2 weeks, the calls had increased to 4 or 5 times a day. Rohit would call during my lunch break, on my commute home, and late at night before bed. When I didn't answer, which happened frequently since I was working, he would call repeatedly until I picked up. He began expressing frustration when I was unavailable, asking why I wasn't answering, and what I was doing that was more important than talking to him. The conversations themselves became increasingly uncomfortable. Rohit would ask detailed questions about my daily routine, wanting to know exactly what time I left for work, which route I took, when I ate lunch, and what time I went to bed. He framed these questions as concern for my well-being, saying he wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. When I tried to redirect the conversation to getting to know each other's personalities and life goals, he would always steer it back to my schedule and activities. A month into this arrangement, Rohit announced that he was planning to visit Mumbai for work and wanted to meet me in person. I agreed, thinking this might help normalize the situation. We arranged to meet at a popular cafe in Bandra on a Saturday afternoon. I arrived at the scheduled time, but Rohit was nowhere to be found. After waiting for 20 minutes, I called him. He answered immediately, which surprised me since he was supposed to be looking for me at the cafe. When I asked where he was, he described my exact location, down to which table I was sitting at and what I was wearing. I looked around frantically, but couldn't see him anywhere. He then told me he had been watching me for 10 minutes, studying how I behaved when I thought I was alone. This revelation sent chills down my spine. I demanded he show himself immediately, and eventually, he emerged from behind a pillar about 30 feet away. He had been deliberately hiding, observing me without my knowledge. When I confronted him about this bizarre behavior, he said it was important for him to see the real me before we met officially. He acted as if this was perfectly normal, even romantic. The meeting itself was deeply unsettling. Rohit knew details about my life that I had never shared with him. He mentioned the names of my colleagues, the restaurant where I usually ate lunch, and even the gym I went to 3 times a week. When I asked how he knew these things, he admitted he had been researching me online and had found my social media profiles, despite the fact that I had never given him my last name or any social media information. After that meeting, I told my parents I wanted to end the arrangement. I explained that Rohit's behavior was making me uncomfortable, but they dismissed my concerns. They said he was just being thorough, that it showed he was serious about marriage, and that I was being too Western in my thinking. They pressured me to give him another chance, especially since his family had already begun planning engagement ceremonies. Against my better judgment, I agreed to continue the courtship for another month. This decision would prove to be a terrible mistake. Rohit's behavior escalated dramatically. He began showing up at places where I regularly went, my office building, the grocery store near my apartment, the coffee shop where I met friends. He would claim these encounters were coincidental, but they happened far too frequently to be random. The phone calls became more aggressive and possessive. Rohit would demand to know who I had spoken to during the day, expressing jealousy over male colleagues and even male friends from college. He started asking for photos of me throughout the day, wanting proof of where I was and what I was doing. When I refused, he would become angry and accusatory, suggesting I was hiding something from him. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was leaving work late, around 8 p.m., when I noticed a man following me to the train station. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim lighting, but something about his walk seemed familiar. I took an unusual route home, making several unnecessary turns to see if he would follow. He did. When I reached my apartment building, I quickly went inside and up to my flat. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was Rohit. He began describing my exact journey home, including the detours I had taken and the specific train car I had boarded. He had been following me, documenting my movements, and then calling to let me know he had been watching. I was terrified. I immediately called my parents and demanded they end the marriage arrangement. This time, I didn't give them a choice. I explained everything. The excessive calls, the stalking behavior, the way he had been monitoring my daily life. Initially, they tried to defend him, but when I described the evening's events, even they became concerned. My father contacted Rohit's family the next day to call off the arrangement. The response was disturbing. Rohit's family was not surprised by my complaints. They admitted that he had exhibited similar behavior with previous marriage prospects, but they had hoped that actually getting engaged would calm him down. They revealed that he had been seeing a psychiatrist for obsessive behaviors, but had stopped taking his medication months earlier. Ending the arrangement should have been the end of it, but Rohit refused to accept the decision. The phone calls continued, sometimes dozens of times per day. When I blocked his number, he would call from different phones. He created fake social media accounts to message me, sent emails to my work address, and even contacted my friends and colleagues, spreading lies about our relationship and claiming I had agreed to marry him. The stalking behavior intensified. Rohit began traveling from Delhi to Mumbai regularly, apparently with the sole purpose of following me. He would show up at my workplace, waiting outside the building for hours. He followed me to restaurants, shopping malls, and social gatherings. Several times, friends reported seeing a man taking photos of me from a distance. I filed a police complaint, but the response was disappointing. The officers suggested this was a family matter that should be resolved through negotiation. They seemed to view it as a dispute between families rather than criminal stalking behavior. It took weeks of persistent complaints and documentation before they agreed to file an official case. Meanwhile, Rohit's behavior became more erratic and threatening. He began sending letters to my apartment, expressing his love and his belief that I was being manipulated by my family into rejecting him. He claimed that if he could just talk to me alone, without outside interference, I would realize we were meant to be together. Some of these letters contained detailed descriptions of my daily activities, proving he was still following me regularly. The situation reached a crisis point when Rohit approached me directly outside my office building. He cornered me in the parking garage, demanding that I explain why I was rejecting him. He became increasingly agitated when I tried to leave, grabbing my arm and insisting that I owed him a proper explanation. Security guards intervened, but not before Rohit had made threats about what he would do if I continued to ignore him. This incident finally prompted serious police action. Rohit was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. The legal case dragged on for over a year. Rohit's family hired expensive lawyers who tried to portray the situation as a misunderstanding, claiming their son was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. They offered financial compensation to make the case disappear. My family faced enormous pressure from the community to drop the charges and accept the settlement. Eventually, Rohit was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison, along with a restraining order preventing any contact with me or my family. However, the social consequences were severe. Word of the stalking case spread through our community, and many people blamed me for not handling the situation more discreetly. Several potential marriage proposals were withdrawn when families learned about the incident. The experience completely changed my perspective on arranged marriage and the vulnerability of women in Indian society. I've since married someone I met independently, but the experience with Rohit left lasting scars. I still feel anxious when men show excessive interest too quickly, and I'm hyper-vigilant about anyone who seems to know too much about my personal life. The first fake friend request appeared in my Facebook notifications in February 2020. The profile belonged to someone named Sarah Chun, claiming to be a marketing professional from San Diego. Her profile looked legitimate: professional headshot, several hundred friends, posts going back years. She mentioned in her request message that we had mutual friends from college and that she'd been meaning to connect with me for ages. I accepted the request without much thought. In the age of social media, it wasn't unusual to connect with people you'd met briefly or forgotten about. Sarah immediately began engaging with my posts, leaving thoughtful comments and liking my photos. She seemed friendly and genuine, often sharing relevant articles and tagging me in posts she thought I'd find interesting. Within a week, Sarah had started direct messaging me. The conversations began innocuously. She asked about my work in graphic design, shared stories about her own marketing career, and discussed our mutual interest in hiking. She was knowledgeable about topics I cared about and seemed to have similar political views and lifestyle preferences. Our conversations felt natural and engaging. As the weeks passed, our online friendship deepened. Sarah would message me almost daily, sometimes just to check in, other times to share something funny or interesting. She remembered details from our previous conversations and would ask follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned. She seemed like the kind of friend everyone hopes to find: attentive, supportive, and genuinely interested in my life. The first red flag was so subtle I almost missed it. During one of our conversations, Sarah mentioned a restaurant I had visited recently, but I had never posted about it on social media or mentioned it in our chats. When I asked how she knew about it, she claimed a mutual friend had mentioned it. Since we supposedly had friends in common, this seemed plausible, though I couldn't remember posting about the restaurant anywhere. More concerning was when Sarah began asking increasingly personal questions. She wanted to know about my dating life, my family relationships, and my financial situation. She framed these inquiries as caring concern, the way a close friend might, but something felt off about the level of detail she was seeking. She also began offering advice about personal situations I had never discussed with her. In March, as the pandemic lockdowns began, Sarah suggested we start video chatting to stay connected during isolation. I was looking forward to finally seeing my online friend face-to-face, but Sarah always had excuses for why she couldn't turn on her camera. Her audio would cut out frequently, and she claimed to have ongoing technical problems. We had several voice-only calls, but I never saw her face despite multiple attempts. Around this time, I received a friend request from another profile, Marcus Rodriguez, supposedly a photographer from Austin. His profile looked authentic, with hundreds of photos showcasing his work and thousands of followers. He also claimed we had mutual connections and mentioned he'd seen my design work through a mutual friend. Like Sarah, Marcus quickly became an active presence in my online life. Marcus's approach was different from Sarah's. Where she had been supportive and nurturing, he was flirtatious and romantic. He complimented my photos, sent me private messages about how attractive he found me, and began hinting that he'd like to visit my city sometime to meet in person. His attention was flattering, and I found myself looking forward to his messages. Both Sarah and Marcus demonstrated an uncanny knowledge of my daily routine and activities. They would ask about events in my life that I hadn't shared publicly, reference places I'd been, and mention people I knew. When pressed, they would always claim to have heard these details from mutual friends or seen them in posts I'd forgotten about. The situation took a disturbing turn in April when I received a direct message from a third profile, Jennifer Walsh, claiming to be a writer from Portland. Her message was different from the others. She said she'd been watching my online activity and was concerned about some of the people I'd been talking to. She warned me that not everyone online was who they seemed to be and suggested I be more careful about the personal information I shared. Jennifer's warning made me suspicious, but not in the way she'd intended. Instead of becoming wary of Sarah and Marcus, I became suspicious of Jennifer herself. The timing of her message seemed too convenient, and her knowledge of my online interactions felt invasive. I began to wonder if all three of these new connections were somehow related. I decided to do some investigation of my own. I started by examining the profiles more carefully, looking for inconsistencies and red flags I might have missed. Sarah's photos, while numerous, seemed to have subtle inconsistencies in lighting and image quality that suggested they might be sourced from different places. Marcus's photography portfolio, while impressive, contained several images that I was able to trace back to stock photo websites through reverse image searches. The breakthrough came when I discovered that all three profiles had been created within days of each other, and all had sent me friend requests within a short time frame. More concerning, they all seemed to have access to information about my offline activities that I had never shared on social media or in our conversations. I realized that someone had been monitoring my digital footprint far more extensively than I'd imagined. They weren't just using information I'd posted publicly. They had access to data I thought was private. This suggested that my accounts had been compromised, or that someone with technical skills was tracking my online activity in ways I didn't understand. The psychological manipulation became clear once I understood what was happening. Sarah had been positioned as the supportive friend, designed to gain my trust and emotional dependence. Marcus represented the romantic interest, meant to make me feel desired and special. Jennifer was the warner, intended to make me paranoid about other people while positioning herself as my protector. Together, they created a comprehensive social environment designed to isolate me and make me dependent on these artificial relationships. I confronted Sarah first, directly asking who she really was and demanding proof of her identity. Her response was to become defensive and hurt, claiming I was being paranoid and accusing her of lying without reason. She said my suspicions were damaging our friendship and that she was disappointed I didn't trust her after all the support she'd given me. Marcus's reaction was more aggressive. When I questioned him, he became possessive and angry, demanding to know why I was suddenly doubting him. He claimed that other people were poisoning my mind against him and that I owed him more consideration given his feelings for me. His messages became increasingly manipulative, alternating between declarations of love and accusations of betrayal. Jennifer, ironically, disappeared entirely as soon as I began asking questions. Her profile became inactive, and she stopped responding to messages. This confirmed my suspicion that she had been part of the same elaborate scheme as the others. I reported all 3 profiles to Facebook and began documenting everything for potential law enforcement action. The person behind them had used VPNs, fake email addresses, and other technical measures to hide their identity. I discovered that my personal email account had been compromised months earlier. The attacker had been reading my private correspondence, monitoring my online shopping habits, and tracking my digital activities across multiple platforms. They had used this information to create believable fake personas that could engage with me on topics I cared about and reference details from my private life. The stalker had also been monitoring my physical location through various means. They had access to photos with GPS data, had been tracking my check-ins at restaurants and events, and had even been monitoring my online purchases to determine where I was shopping and what I was buying. The police eventually revealed that the person behind all of this was someone I had dated briefly 2 years earlier, David Kim, a software developer I had met through a dating app. Our relationship had lasted only a few weeks, ending when I realized we weren't compatible. He had seemed to accept the breakup at the time, but had apparently been harboring obsessive feelings ever since. The case took over a year to prosecute. David had covered his tracks well, and proving his identity required extensive digital forensics. He was eventually convicted on charges including cyberstalking, identity theft, and computer fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. The experience completely changed how I interact with people online. I moved into the Riverside Apartments in downtown Portland during the fall of 2017. It was my first place living alone after college, and I was excited about the independence. The building was older but well-maintained, with reasonable rent and a decent neighborhood. The maintenance requests started innocently enough. A dripping faucet here, a flickering light there. Tom, the building's maintenance worker, was always quick to respond. He was in his 40s, average height, with graying hair and thick glasses. He seemed harmless, even friendly, always making small talk about the weather or asking how I was settling in. I thought nothing of it when he mentioned he'd grown up in the area, or when he asked about my work schedule to know when would be best to make repairs. The first red flag should have been how often things seemed to break in my apartment. My neighbors rarely had maintenance issues, but I was calling Tom at least twice a week. The garbage disposal would mysteriously jam, the bedroom fan would stop working, or the thermostat would malfunction. Each time, Tom would arrive within an hour, tools in hand, ready to fix whatever was wrong. He always seemed to know exactly what the problem was before he even looked at it. I started noticing small things were different when I came home from work. Nothing major, just tiny details that felt off. A book on my coffee table would be facing a different direction. The blinds in my bedroom would be adjusted slightly. My laptop would be in a different position on my desk. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that I simply didn't remember how I'd left things. After all, who would break into an apartment just to move things around? The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November. I had been feeling uneasy for weeks. That night, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I was going to rearrange every inch of my apartment. I started in the living room, arranging my walls, shelves, adjust picture frames, the furniture and others. In my bedroom, I examined the smoke detector, the light fixtures, other appliances to make sure it works. I was in the bathroom when I found it. Behind the mirror above the sink, I felt something that didn't belong. A small, hard object taped to the back of the glass. My hands were shaking as I carefully removed the mirror from the wall. There it was, a tiny wireless camera, no bigger than a button, with a clear view of my entire bathroom. The serial number on the device was partially worn off, but I could make out enough to know it was a professional-grade surveillance camera. The discovery sent ice through my veins. I immediately began searching the rest of my apartment with renewed urgency. I found 2 more cameras, one hidden in the bedroom light fixture pointing directly at my bed, and another in the kitchen, concealed inside what looked like a smoke detector but clearly wasn't. I called the police immediately. While waiting for them to arrive, I sat in my car in the parking lot, afraid to stay in my apartment, but unable to leave the building. I watched through my windshield as Tom's truck pulled into the maintenance bay. He was working late, which wasn't unusual, but now it took on a sinister meaning. When the officers arrived, they documented everything and collected the cameras as evidence. The investigation moved quickly. The cameras were all the same model, purchased from a security supply company using the building's maintenance account. Tom had been ordering them under the guise of upgrading building security, but they were never installed in common areas, only in my apartment. The detective explained that they'd need to search Tom's residence and examine his computer equipment. What they found there was beyond disturbing. Tom had been recording me for months, accumulating hundreds of hours of footage. He had videos of me sleeping, changing clothes, showering, and going about my daily life in what I thought was privacy. His computer contained detailed logs of my daily routine, notes about my work schedule, and even a folder of screenshots he'd taken from the camera feeds. But the cameras were just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation revealed that Tom had been entering my apartment regularly, sometimes while I was at work, sometimes while I was sleeping. He had made copies of my keys months earlier, when I'd first requested maintenance. He'd been going through my personal belongings, reading my mail, and even taking small items as souvenirs, items I'd assumed I'd simply misplaced. Tom was arrested at the apartment complex the next morning. He didn't deny the charges. In fact, he seemed almost relieved to be caught. During his confession, he told police that he'd been watching me since the day I moved in, that he'd fallen in love with me from afar and believed we had a special connection. He genuinely thought I would eventually come to understand his feelings if he could just learn enough about me. Tom pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges including unlawful surveillance, breaking and entering, and stalking. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with me. I moved out of Riverside Apartments immediately and stayed with my parents for 2 months while looking for a new place. I installed my own security system and changed the locks twice in the first month. For years afterward, I would feel paranoid about maintenance workers, always wondering if they were legitimate or if they had ulterior motives.